It wasn't 100 hours ago that the Yanks dropped the bomb and ended the war. The whole business has left me feeling rather sticky. At once I behold both the paradisial prospect that this struggle will no longer dictate the pattern of our days, and the abominable certainty that innocence paid for this convenience with whatever days they had left. There are so many prospective funerals to attend that we may attend none, actually. But we may retire to the pub afterwards, as though the former had preceded. What we cannot pour out onto our graves, we shall pour into ourselves. Let us be with them in spirit. Eventually, the distinctive scent of navy cut tobacco reaches me. Ah, Tolkien has arrived. This man contains legions. The world has yet to take notice of this logistical impossibility. A few have found pleasure in his translations of Beowulf and Gawain, or his children's book, but the author dwarves his Hobbit. In his home I have seen the misty mountains of manuscripts, piled precarious, among them entire languages and topographies the likes of which might even help God to pass an hour in inventing. Finding the full fruits of history and mythology easy enough to swallow, dear Tolkien has taken upon it himself to reconstitute those elements into something approaching an original form. Whether anyone else shall ever behold the extent of this labour, and bring hand to mouth in the appropriate gesture of shock and gratitude, I do not know. But I hope so, very much. Perhaps I've even prayed so, though such would be theologically dubious at best. Glad you could make it, chum. I thought I might not, but the sound of the radio grew intolerable. Edith seems to think the louder the news, the quicker our Christopher will materialize back home. Cheers to that. And do we know where he is now? South Africa, I last heard. Probably doing the same as us, I shouldn't wonder. Oh yes, his barracks knows a thing or two about that. He's likely stopped up to his ears to drown out the cries of sanguinary celebration. A barbaric yaws of brave Bosch. I wouldn't suppose Whitman would have cared to see it, do you? Heavens, no. Though it would be fine to witness him call that Oppenheimer the yardstick of impotence or the like. And Einstein a mathematical meddler, most like. Crisps? Don't mind if I do. Mere grace seems somewhat trite today. Would it trouble you if I... Please do. Laudate Pueri Dominum, Laudate Nominum Domini, sit nomnen Domini benedictum ex hoc nunc et usque in sacelum. A solicito usque ad occasium laudil nomnen Domini. Excelsus super omnis gentis Dominus, et super caelias gloria ejus, qui sicut Dominus Deo noster, qui in altus habitat, et humilia respita in caelo et in terra suscitans altera in opium, et du cerco erigens paperum ut collesium ecum principaris, cum principus populi sui, habiter facti sterirum in domo, materiam ferorum latenum. I don't suppose they'll stop now that I've had a taste of it. The atom bombs, I mean. Not until they've made the sea of glass before God's throne. I just hope I can finish before they get round to it. Anything new for today? Oh, a little. I'd like to have this business about Moria done before Christopher returns. The absence of my amanuensis has slowed me considerably. Did I tell you what he said concerning Samwise? No. What was that? He said that I am forbidden from changing the surname Gamgee. He said too long, so we're now stuck with it. Well, that settles that. Next crisis. It might be a tad overdone, you know. I've been left to my own devices. Gandalf stood in the middle of the span. leaning on the staff in his right hand, but in his other hand Glamdring gleamed, cold and white. His enemy halted him, facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. It raised the whip, and the throngs whined and cracked. Fire came from its nostrils, but Gandalf stood firm. "You cannot pass," he said. The orc stood still, and a dead silence fell. "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of a flame of an orc. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass." The Balrog made no answer. The fire in it seemed to die, but the darkness grew. It stepped forward slowly onto the bridge, and suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. But still Gandalf could be seen, glimmering in on the gloom. He seemed small and altogether alone, grey and bent, like a wizened tree before the onset of a storm. From out of the shadow a red sword leaped flaming. Glamdring glittered white in answer. There was a ringing clash and a stab of white fire. The Balrog fell back, and its sword flew up in molten fragments. The wizard stayed on the bridge, stepped back a pace, and then again stood still. "You cannot pass," he said. With a bound, the Balrog leaped full upon the bridge. Its whip whirled and hissed. "He cannot stand alone," cried Aragorn suddenly, and ran back along the bridge. "Endil!" he shouted. "I am with you, Gandalf!" "Gondor!" cried Boromir, and leaped after him. At that moment Gandalf lifted his staff, and crying aloud he smote the bridge before him. The staff broke asunder and fell from his hand. A blinding sheet of white flame sprang up, the bridge cracked. Right at the Balrog's feet it broke, and the stone upon which it stood crashed into the gulf, while the rest remained poised, quivering like a tongue of rock thrust out into emptiness. With a terrible cry the Balrog fell forward, and its shadow plunged down and vanished. But even as it fell, it swung its whip, and the throngs lashed and curled around the wizard's knees, dragging him to the brink. He staggered and fell, grasped vainly at the stone, and slid into the abyss. "Fly, you fools!" he cried, and was gone. "Well, I'm no Christopher, but if I were, I should forbid you from altering this either. It's simply electrifying. Thomas, dear, might as well rain indoors, here and now. But enough about Middle-earth, old man. What news of the kilns?" "One is all but disappeared into his room since he had the news, I'm afraid. With our last bottle in tow. Poor fellow. Give my regards to our tender Boswell when he emerges." "Certainly. Owen had already declared his absence, by the by. He's mentioned he's found a couple of tins of your blend he could be persuaded to part with in return for another signed Hobbit." "He has himself a deal. Might as well be my last copy now that I think of it. I wonder if the publisher will go in for a new edition once this is all behind us. Say, I could ask them about wardrobe, if you like. 2 birds and all." "I don't even have a query yet. Kind of you to offer, though. What you can do is let me know what you think of this." Turkish delight. Edmund stood still, saying nothing. He was too confused by this time to understand what the question meant. "I see you are an idiot, whatever else you may be," said the Queen. "Answer me once and for all, or I shall lose my patience. Are you human?" "Yes, your Majesty." "And pray, how did you come to enter my domain?" please, your majesty, I came through a wardrobe. A wardrobe? What do you mean? I opened a door and just found myself here, your majesty, said Edmund. Ha! said the queen, speaking more to herself than him. A door? A door from the world of men? I've heard of such things as may wreck all, but he is only one, and he is easily dealt with. As she spoke these words, she rose from her seat and looked Edmund full in the face, her eyes flaming. At the same moment she raised her wand. Edmund felt sure that she was going to do something dreadful, but he seemed unable to move. Then, just as he gave himself up for lost, she appeared to change her mind. "My poor child," she said in quite a different voice. "How cold you look. Come, sit with me here on the sledge, and I will put my mantle around you, and we will talk." This Edmund is an awful little gutter snipe. I do love it, as much as I hate him. As intended. Now, I just have to make sure that his redemption is as convincing as his fall. It's certainly within your powers, Jack. But for now, off to the field of blood with him. Briar and meerschaum are kept in hard cases when portable. Too expensive to just stick in one's pocket like a disposable clay or corn cob. They're just two pieces, really, instead of a bowl. Though the accoutrements which accompany the instrument are considerable. One needs their tin or pouch of tobacco, of course, matches, and the oft-overlooked check tool. The bowl is loaded thus. 3 pinches, each packed with the index finger. The pressure with which one packs the bowl increases each time, like the shaking of a child's hand, then a woman's, then a man's. The tamper of the check tool finalizes this stage, so it's all firm, even and ready for the false light or charring light. Then you let it go out. Don't be afraid to let it go out. Now, it's ready for another tamp and a proper relight. As a bird readies its nest for an egg, so we have readied our bowlful of tobacco for its coal. Pipe tobacco isn't a cigarette. It's never inhaled. You'll turn green as a fresh-faced sailor if you do. This is about taste. The nicotine is ancillary. It is a sign of inexperience to only draw in upon it. One must also exhale through it. This back and forth give and take regulates the temperature, keeping the coal alive without allowing it to transmute the flavors into a mouthful of ashes. After one is done lighting and the coal has taken hold, the smoke ought to look less like the spluttering exhaust of a steam train, and more like the steady tendrils of a tea kettle. Now the flavor ripens, and it is tasted, not on the capture, but on the release. Whoever would save it must lose it. My love for this fellowship of Jacks is a true love, but it's not my first. That title belongs to the Tea Club Barovian Society, or TCBS for short, the Writers' Guild of my youth. It was just before the war, the one we called Great, and naively supposed would be the end of all wars. It was Smith, Gilson, Wiseman, and myself, the Immortal Four, inappropriately called. Gilson died on the first day of the Somme. Smith went shortly after the battle ended. I received a letter from him before he died. In it he told me if he didn't make it out, that I ought to put on paper all the things he would have liked, so I'm trying, my friend. I'm trying, relentlessly.